Hello and welcome to the Mac Basement. This video is going to cover something that's a little bit outside of the normal topics that I cover. We're going to talk about retro gaming handhelds. Now, the majority of my museum is focused on mostly Macs and Apple products and Apple software and magazines and promotional materials. But it's really about nostalgia for me. So I do have some things that cover other items that I either grew up with or owned when I was younger or wanted to own when I was younger. So that includes things like some PCs. I've got a few PCs. I've also got a collection of CPUs, a lot of Intel CPUs and AMD CPUs. I've got a huge collection of Palm Pilots because those were something that I not only wanted but also owned when I was younger. So recently I've really gotten into retro gaming, another thing from when I was a kid. So I used to own Super Nintendo, I had a Game Boy, I had a Game Gear. I didn't have a lot of games for them, but I had a few games. I was thinking back to those and really started to want to collect them again. So I had a couple options when I wanted to start getting back into some of the older games. I could buy hardware and games, so I could go on eBay, I could buy a Game Boy, I could buy a Game Gear, I could buy some cartridges to go with them, and I started looking into that. They're rather expensive. Game Boys go anywhere from $20 to $80 for an original Game Boy, a color Game Boy, a Game Boy Advance, or a Game Boy Advance SP, and the games are expensive as well. An alternative is to use emulation. There have been emulators out for handheld devices for many years. I think there are Super Nintendo emulators for my classic Macs, or at least my early PowerPC Macs running classic Mac OS, that can run, Super Mario World and other games like that. So emulators have been out there for almost every system for a very long time. And recently I discovered that companies are starting to make customized hardware for it, which I did not realize was a thing. So I picked up a couple what are called retro gaming handhelds, which are purpose-built devices that run emulators and emulate a bunch of different systems. There are several out there now. Some of them are built by American companies. The majority of them are built by Chinese companies. All of them are small devices running with ARM CPUs, and they run either some form of Linux or Android, which itself is a form of Linux. And they're purpose-built. They have controls built in. They have 3 to 4 inch screens. They've got speakers. Some have rumble packs, but they don't take cartridges. They don't run actual game cartridges. They run ROMs that are copied off of cartridges. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about 2 different retro gaming handhelds I bought that actually represent 2 ends of the spectrum. I have right here are the Anbernic RG351P on the left, this purple one, and the Powkiddy V90 on the right. We're going to talk about the differences and similarities of these. So let's start with the V90. So we're going to move this one out of the way a little bit. So the V90 is one of the few retro gaming handhelds that has a clamshell design. So this actually is very similar in shape and size to a Game Boy Advance SP. And it's got that clamshell folding design, screen up top, buttons on the front. And it's not bad. It's about a $40 handheld if you buy it directly from the manufacturer. And it looks very much like a Game Boy Advance with a few extra buttons on it. So it's got your A and B, X and Y, but it's also got left and right and R1 and R1 and L1, R2 and L2 on the front. It has a rechargeable lithium battery. USB-C for charging. That's all it does is charging. There's no, as far as I know, there's no data transfer capabilities. Headphone jack, a volume roller knob. It takes a micro SD card to store its software and games on. Little on-off button here. It's pretty cheap. I mean, its retail value is 40 bucks. I paid $42 from eBay. Most of these you buy on a Chinese e-commerce site, and they do come direct from China, so they take weeks and weeks to ship, sometimes a couple months to ship and get through customs and all that fun stuff. So I bought mine off of eBay because I wanted it to ship faster, and it did. It took about 2 weeks. I ordered it before Christmas and it arrived before Christmas. In terms of build quality, it's not great. I mean, the screen hinge is pretty floppy, but it's not going to fall off. The plastic is pretty chintzy, but with light to moderate use, I think it's going to be fine. It's got a 320 by 240 pixel IPS display. It's 3 inches diagonal, and it's at a 4:3 aspect ratio, which matches most classic consoles and Game Boys pretty closely, so you don't have to scale a lot, which is pretty nice. It's got this interesting UI that is called NX Hope. It's easy enough to navigate. You change the tabs at the top with the R1 and L1 buttons, and then you use the D-pad to navigate around. It has some built-in applications, including a writing app, which is kind of silly because you can't actually write. It's got a file manager, but the good stuff is in the systems it supports. So the cool thing about both of these handhelds is that they both come with a lot of games, and that is a gray area because ROM sharing online is not necessarily legal. There are questions about whether you can download ROMs for games that you've legally purchased or whether you can't. Some of these handhelds sidestep that whole issue by just shipping with ROMs, so I didn't download these ROMs, they were just here. And it makes it nice for a demo at least. So this particular handheld is pretty easy to hold. Again, it's the same size as a Game Boy Advance SP, so it's pretty comfortable in the hands. It's definitely very Chinese. This FC emulator is the Famicom emulator, which is what we would call the NES in America, and the SFC is the Super Nintendo in America. So it's got the Chinese names for these systems, which doesn't really matter, but you can see what games are installed by opening those up. Takes a minute. This does run an ARM CPU. I'm not sure how many cores. It plays games mostly fine, but sometimes the navigation is a little bit slow. But it comes with a ton of games, just tons and tons and tons and tons of NES games. Some of them are real, some of them are not real. Some of them are Chinese or Japanese localized with some weird English translations. Some of them are not, but there's a ton of stuff on this to explore, and I have not explored a lot of it. I did do a lot of picking around though. So it's got some of your classics like, Super Mario, both Super Mario 2s, the one that was released in America, the one that was released in Japan, Super Mario Brothers 3. It also has Super Mario World, which is not an actual official NES game. That was a Nintendo game for the Super NES, but somebody re-engineered it for the NES. It's kind of funny to watch. Super Mario Brothers 4, I don't think actually exists. And then we've got crazy ones like Super Mario 6, 9, 14, like 16. None of these are real. These are crazy. When you start them up, they look really, really weird. What the heck is this? Like, this doesn't even have Mario in it. It's got a dude in a boat. Foreign Island. Like, what the heck is that? But I mean, it's a game. If you want to play a game, stuff randomly shows up. I don't know what this is. We have snails. It's very weird. But this particular handheld, it doesn't really have a lot of settings to it. You can hit this reset button to get to the emulator menu for the emulator that you're using, and there are limited settings. You know, for this particular one, for the NES, I can change some parameters, but not much. I think I can, oops. I think I can change the, nope. I can't even change the aspect ratio on this one. Just is what it is. But it's pretty cool. It works pretty well. I haven't had any issues with it performance-wise, other than trying to run Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, that it chugs at. It can't run it at the full 60 frames per second. But I mean, otherwise, it works pretty well for, I mean, for 42 bucks, it's actually a really good deal. It includes a ton of Game Boy games, Game Boy Advance games, Game Boy Color games, a ton of Super Nintendo games. It also includes some MAME games in this arcade section, Neo Geo, a bunch of other stuff. Oddly enough, it also includes Linux games like Quake 1, Quake 2, Wolfenstein 3D, which is funny because at least with Quake 2, it's almost impossible to control because you don't have the precision of a mouse or an analog stick. You just have this D-pad, and you can't tilt your gun up and down, and you basically can't play it. Similarly, it also includes PlayStation emulation, which is also kind of hit and miss. I was excited because I saw Resident Evil on here. Also almost impossible to use with this D-pad. It's just not, it's not good. It doesn't have many settings. It does have some skins that you can choose from. So it's got a default. It's got these different UI themes. And it doesn't really have that many settings. It's not really fancy. It's pretty bare bones. The screen's good enough. It works well enough. It does, in terms of performance, it does have some screen tearing. It is known for screen tearing, so you'll see in some of the games that the screen, well, probably in most of the games, that you'll see horizontal lines across as you jump and move. The screen does tear. Just what do you want for 40 bucks? But this one does include thousands of games, so it gives you something to play with, something to work with. It comes in this red color, and it also comes in yellow, so you get it in red or yellow. Speaker is reasonable enough. The buttons are mushy. I mean, they're not great, but again, for 40 bucks, it's not bad. This is the Anbernic RG351P, which is considered one of the best retro gaming handhelds on the market right now. It is a follow-up to the 350P. The P stands for plastic because Anbernic makes these in both plastic and metal, and the metal is like $30 or $40 more, but it's basically the same thing made out of metal, and it's heavier, but it feels more premium. This one runs a quad-core ARM CPU. I don't know how many cores the Powkiddy has, but this one definitely has stronger performance. It emulates more stuff, so the Powkiddy can emulate up through, it can kind of emulate the PS1, but not really well. I mean, that's really for your Sega, your NES, Super NES, your arcade games. Like, that's really what that one's built for. This one can emulate the Nintendo DS a little bit. It can emulate more PlayStation. It can do N64 a little bit. It can do PSP a little bit, which is pretty cool. It runs an operating system called EmuElec. I'm running a fork of that called 351Elec that is designed to be more customized for this hardware. It is very similar in terms of controls to the Powkiddy, except it does include dual analog sticks. So it's got your ABXY, your D-pad, dual analog sticks, your L1R1, L2R2, and if you click the sticks, those are your L3 and R3, which is pretty nice. It's got headphone jack. It has dual USB-C jacks, and it has dual jacks because they can actually be used for data, which is pretty cool. So you can plug other devices in here. You can plug controllers in if you want to use a controller separate from the actual device. You can also plug in a Wi-Fi module. So this doesn't have built-in Wi-Fi, but if you want to add Wi-Fi, you can plug in a Wi-Fi module and you can download stuff on it, which is pretty awesome. That's how I had to install the Nintendo DS emulator. And it works really well. It also comes with a bunch of games, thousands of games as well. They're spread out a little bit differently, and we'll get into some of the differences in a little bit. It also includes a rumble motor, which is pretty nice. So for games that use rumble, this will actually rumble, which is pretty awesome. It's good stuff. This one cost a bit more. It cost between $80 and $100. The price actually went up when I first looked into this in December. It was around, I think, $85. Now it's selling for about $100. I got mine on eBay for about $90. Again, you get these from China. They take anywhere from weeks to months to ship. I got mine on eBay. I ordered it before Christmas. I received it before Christmas, so pretty awesome. It has a bigger display than the Powkiddy. I'll put the Powkiddy next to it here. So the display is larger. You can see that there. It's larger. It's a different aspect ratio as well. It is a 3:2 aspect ratio, so more of a widescreen aspect ratio than most handhelds. Most of them are 4:3, which is what most systems used. 3:2 is actually perfect for Game Boy Advance games. Those were more of a widescreen aspect ratio, so if you want a Game Boy Advance machine, this is a great one to get. Otherwise, you're going to either have some kind of weirdo scaling and squishing to fit it onto the screen, or you'll have black bars. I tend to go with black bars because I prefer the geometry to be correct, but there's still some switching. And this is that landscape design. So again, this guy is pretty comfortable. This one is comfortable as well because it's like a PSP or a Nintendo DS, or a Switch or something like that. So it's pretty nice. The software on this is much more configurable. You can do like a ton of settings. You can set per game settings, you can set per system settings, you can customize your controller, you can change the UI, you can change the way that it performs and the way it does power management and all these other things, which is pretty cool. You can reorder things, which is nice. It also has the concept of favorites, which is really nice because then you can just organize all your favorite games into one place, which is great. You cannot do that on the Powkiddy. The Powkiddy also has a closed source operating system, so you don't really get any updates for it. As I said, I'm running a forked operating system for this one, so that one's being actively maintained. They're doing releases every week or two, so I'm behind a couple versions now, but it's really good. Really cool. One of my favorite games for my Game Boy is Super Mario Land. It came with it. I just love it. Again, we're running Linux here, so you get to see some Linux terminal commands running. But this is running with the Game Boy color set, so it looks exactly like a Game Boy. It's like having a Game Boy in my hand. Pretty cool. But if I want my game to look different, it supports all of the colors the Game Boy supported. So I could set the default Game Boy Pocket color, just black and white, looks like it's on a Game Boy Pocket. If I don't like that, I can set it to any of the built-in color palettes. Let's do pastel mix. What does that look like? Oh, just like using a Game Boy. I just don't have to wait until it starts up and push all those crazy buttons. I can change my color palettes on demand, which is pretty cool. These emulators also support shaders, which let you do really neat stuff to the screen. So if you turn the shaders on and you load a shader up, you can see that they simulate what an LCD might look like. And if we turn this one back to the original Game Boy, oops. Now it really looks like a Game Boy. You can see the fake pixels in there and everything. And I kind of prefer this look because the screen resolution is much higher than what you would have had on an original piece of hardware. And when you scale it up, it kind of looks too smooth and too blocky. So the fake pixels give it more of that. I don't know, it just kind of fills in the gaps for me. I really like it. So this is probably how I'll play my games. Maybe not with green, but... And then when you're done, you just quit. Or, before you quit, you can save where you're at. All these emulators support save states, which is super, super cool. The Powkiddy also supports save states. And save states allow you to save the game wherever you are. It doesn't matter if the game supports saving or not. So all of those Nintendo games that you could never save in, you can save through an emulator, and you can just reload it when you're done, which is really, really fun. But when I'm done, I just quit. And I'm done. I'm done being a Game Boy user. Maybe I want to play the Game Boy Advance. Well, now I'm going to start that up. There we go. There we go. Pick up where I left off here. And when I'm done, same thing. Quit. Pretty cool. And it tells you here what system it's for. So we'll play some Super Nintendo, some Donkey Kong. So let's compare these two. So I think both of them are comfortable to hold in their own way. I think both of the form factors are good. The Powkiddy is a little bit more pocketable, which is nice. The Powkiddy is a little bit more pocketable, which is nice. It's quick to start up. I think it's a really great system for your 8-bit and 16-bit games to play. The RG351P is also pretty comfortable. It doesn't quite fit in the pocket as well, but it doesn't really stress you out too much. It's nice. You know, they both feel good. The 351 has much better controls in terms of their clickiness and responsiveness, but the controls on the V90 are not unusable by any means. They both support arbitrary save points, like I said, so regardless of whether your game lets you save along the way or not, you can do it with these emulators. And they both include pretty humongous game libraries. They both include thousands of games. The 351P has more emulators, so in total it has more games. It focuses a lot more on Game Boy games. It's got a lot more Game Boy games. The V90 has a lot more NES and Super NES games. However, neither of them had Tetris for the Game Boy or Super Mario All-Stars, which are two of my favorite games. The 351P has better build quality, better buttons. It has the analog stick for PS1 games. The V90, as I said earlier, the build quality is cheap. The hinge is pretty floppy. The buttons are mushier. They're usable, but they're mushier. And it has no analog stick for PS1 games, so it's kind of pointless to even play them on it because you can't really control anything. The 351, although it's a faster machine in terms of hardware, it actually boots a bit slower. It takes almost 20 seconds to boot, but once you get in there, the UI is really nice. It supports favorites, which is essential when you've got that many games to sort through. It's easy to just mark something as a favorite and then play it again. It's got a lot of customizability. You can customize per emulator, per game. You can set defaults. You can use shaders to change the screen. You can actually swap out the emulators too. There's 4 different Super Nintendo emulators on there. So if you have an issue with one game, you can set that game to use a different emulator that works better for it. Pretty cool. The V90 is very fast to boot, boots in 5 seconds, but there's no favorites list. There's really limited customization. The emulators installed on it don't really have a lot of options. It's just wanting the power save going here. So it's certainly limited. In terms of aspect ratio, the V90 has a better aspect ratio for your majority of your classic consoles, Game Boys, Sega Game Gears, things like that. The 351P is better suited to Game Boy Advance. You can change the scaling factor of any of the systems on it, though. You'll just get black bars on the side, so your total screen space is lower for those, but they look fine. I think the lower pixel resolution of the V90 though actually makes classic games look better because there's less pixel doubling going on. They look more crisp because there's just fewer pixels as trying to scale up. There are more pixels to scale up on the 351, so some of those NES, SNES games, they look a little bit less nice on the 351 actually. Although I think the 351 has better colors. The colors on the V90 are kind of dark. But overall, they're both fine, I think. And again, in terms of price, you've got, $40, $90 to $100 probably right now. So definitely a difference in price. If you don't have any retro gaming handhelds, either of these are great because they're easy to set up. I am not a retro gaming whiz. I don't want to be a whiz. I don't want to spend a lot of time configuring them. So these two are great because they come preloaded with stuff and it's all ready to go. And that's nice. So either one is going to be fine. If you don't have anything and you don't want to spend a lot of money, this one's not bad. It's functional. It's a good way to get into it. And then if you want to get something that's quote unquote better, more advanced, the 351P is a great device, especially if you get them on eBay because they ship faster, and depending on the demand, you can actually save money on them, which is pretty nice. So I like both of them. I'm probably going to be using this one more, but I still enjoy this one.